Hello, this is Krista with thelifeinprogress.ca, and I'm here with a fabulous guest. I'm assuming he's fabulous. I've been following him online. Jake Ernst. I hope I pronounced that right. Is that correct? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
So Jake is a fellow Canadian. He's a registered social worker and psychotherapist. He works out of Toronto, Ontario, but I think he works online as well. So, people could contact you. Jake works primarily with young people experiencing a diverse range of mental health needs, but I follow him. I definitely appreciate his work, and so I want to bring it to my community of humans who are primarily in the messy middle of life. Welcome, a formal welcome, Jake.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Nice. So a quick question that wasn't on my little talking point list. Are you allowed to work with people in the United States or other countries?
That's a good question. I'm actually only licensed to work with people in Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah, so my services, because I'm a psychotherapist as well, that only covers therapy in Ontario.
Oh, so DRATs, and okay, that's good to know. Yeah, because I often feel like this, the pandemic, one of the benefits is so much stuff moving online, which makes it more accessible, but it's good to know that sometimes there are those constraints, like legal constraints, I guess, for practicing. Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately it is a legal constraint, but yeah. Thank you for asking it. It's a question I get a lot actually. So.
Yeah, okay. So just a quick spin-off then, if somebody hears this interview, because it will go up in some different places online, and they are curious about finding a compatible therapist for themselves or their children, is it still a good idea to reach out to you? And do you guys have a directory that you can just refer people?
Yeah, we do. It depends on kind of where in the world you are, but for sure, in Canada, yes, and in some places in the United States. But my network is pretty large, so sometimes it even just means that I just have to reach out to some people that I know in that area, and then we kind of get a good list of resources and supports that are available.
Okay, all right, wonderful. All right, so Jake, I already, so people know, these ladies know that I send out talking points anyways, though I love to veer off course and chase people down rabbit holes. But with your permission, I'd love to ask you a couple questions to get to know you better. Each month I have a focus or theme for the work that I do inside the Brave and Beautiful community. And this month our topic is self-compassion. We're deepening our roots of self-compassion. So along those lines, couple questions for you, because I like to model what we're learning, practicing. What are a few things that you like or love about yourself, and how are you intentionally practicing self-compassion these days?
Wow. You're starting off with the hard-hitting questions.
Yeah, I don't do small talk. It's just let's just go right in.
It's funny. I talk to people for a living, which means that I don't often have to talk about myself. And so I want to make that also clear about a lot of people in the helping profession. A lot of what draws us to this work is that we get to focus on other people's problems and not so much on ours. So I do want to normalize that talking about ourselves and especially holding ourselves with gentleness and holding ourselves with grace and offering ourselves compassion, that isn't a normal practice for everyone. And I would venture to guess that it's not normal for a lot of people. And the reason why that I've come to understand is because we often speak to ourselves the way that we've been spoken to in our life. And so whether that be from parents or teachers or coaches or whoever we take up space with, right? And so to develop an intentional practice of self-compassion means that we have to re-narrate the ways in which we speak to ourselves. And often that's uncomfortable, and often that's really difficult to start a new language for self-compassion. So again, I could talk about this all day, but to answer your question, I think the things that I admire most about myself is my open-mindedness. I think I'm someone who kind of hears things, and I do a lot of reading, a lot of research, but I like to gain a broad perspective before making snap judgments or making an assumption about people. And I think the thing that allows me to do that is my fascination just with the human spirit and kind of the way that we all come together, and then conversely the way that we kind of all fall apart. And so I find that the human experience and the human condition is one that I'm really drawn to, and I think that I have a way of kind of observing the human condition in a way that uh, involves my full self, which is awesome. But then also I can like piece apart the parts of myself that don't, maybe match up. So I think that I'm pretty self-aware in that regard, and I think that my emotional intelligence um, is also in my corner in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And how are you, consciously or intentionally practicing self-compassion these days?
Oh, every single day am I checking the ways in which I'm speaking to myself. It just requires that we tune into the language that we have and the ways in which we're speaking to ourselves. And I have three kind of gates that I let my words kind of pass through every day, and it's is it helpful, is it necessary, and is it kind? And that's kind of my criteria for self-compassion. And if it doesn't meet those criteria, then I don't pay attention to it. Then it's just noise in my mind. And so a way that I cultivate that self-compassion is not only just sort of ask myself those questions, like, is what I'm saying to myself or someone else helpful, necessary, or kind? Um, but I'm also kind of, how do I return that back to myself in a really gentle kind of way? And so I find tuning into myself and tuning into my body is a really specific form of self-compassion that we don't really talk about a lot. We often think that self-compassion is just about like the thoughts or the words that we tell ourselves. But even just like, for example, like holding my heart, or like holding space for like the
Mhm.
pace or the beat that it's kind of offering me in this moment, like, is another way that I can kind of soothe myself. And so
Yeah.
those are way intentional practices of self-compassion that I can hold myself accountable to every day.
I was just smiling because on my previous video, I shared that. Like the women in my group have seen me a lot, probably on video, holding my heart. And especially in this hard season where,
Yes.
or I'll grab my husband's hand and I just put it here
Yes.
because I need his, help holding me steady too. So yeah, I love
Uh,
that.
how grounding, right? And how these are called like self-holding practices, right? And so one of my favorite, I don't know if you can see, but one of my favorite is putting your right hand under your left armpit, and then taking your left hand over top of your arm. So it kind of it's supposed to mimic a bit of like a swaddle. And if you want to add like a rock to it, if like back and forth or side to side,
Mm-hmm.
that can be like a really nice way that you like offer yourself that kind of love. And especially it's especially soothing for people that either didn't receive that kind of love maybe growing up, or it can also feel quite scary, right? So I caution people to pay attention to how it feels for people. And my general rule is that if it doesn't feel good or nurturing, then
Yeah.
stop, then don't do it, right? And so it
Yeah.
just requires that we tune in to ourselves.
Yeah.
And in a culture where we're so disconnected, it can be incredibly difficult to tune into what our needs are when we are never taught what they were.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah. Absolutely. So I love that right off you're talking about kind of this body, like tuning into our bodies. And I want to talk more about that as we go. Um, but even, I mean, this is personal, but like I share a lot, like the people who work with me closely just know some of the reality of my life because, I'm not going to hide. It's too big to hide. But even things like how I rock, I naturally rock, and how you can feel insecure or like super vulnerable if people feel you, but like it's just my body is like I like to say our bodies are for us. Our bodies and brains are for us. They're always working for us.
love that.
And so it's like, yeah, a self-soothing, a self-regulating, and it can look weird, but I'm like, but like looking weird is like, okay, I'm good with weird. Like, because what I see out there, people who aren't working, to increase emotional intelligence, to love themselves well, it's like, that's not the model I'm after. So if weird is my model, I'm in.
I love that. And I often, as a therapist, I do a lot of kind of um, presenting or balancing two options. And so to me, I hear like, well, would you rather look weird or would you rather feel uncomfortable in your body? Right. And so those are sort of some of the the things that people may be balancing or holding with two hands, right? Is balancing the dual nature of those, right? It sucks to look weird, but it's also really regulating. And so the reason why it looks weird or feels weird, or perhaps there's judgment placed on it, is because of all of the like the stuff outside of us, right? And all the judgment from others, so who probably are not being very compassionate or very gentle in their beliefs or expectations, right?
Yeah, and I would love to just be one little part of normalizing some, like, just what it looks like, sounds like, feels like to be fully human in a messy world. And so, yeah, okay. So let's dive into your roots of safety model. So I downloaded this from your website, little handout. Anybody watching after the fact who doesn't know where to get this, I can, why don't you, do you know the link offhand,
I
Jake?
do, yeah. Yeah, it's mswjake .com/resources.
Okay,
So I have a
great.
whole
Yeah.
resource page on my website where that package is kind of linked in, along with some other little cool tidbits.
Okay, good. So, all right, so we're going to dive into this. So you've created this, it's called the Roots of Safety model. You kind of nicknamed it the trauma-informed love languages. And that may have been actually what stopped me in my scroll and got me to like say, what? Like get curious and kind of check it out. I am a fan of the love languages, or all kind of types of typology and, you know, tools that help us just deepen self-awareness. The love languages is so common now, but in case somebody doesn't know what it is, it's referring to what makes us feel loved, essentially. So, and I do love it because we learn about ourselves, we learn how to better love or express love to our partners, our children, and our friends through that. But you call this let's see, you say the trauma-informed love languages. Yeah, but this model is actually about not what makes me feel loved, but what makes me feel safe. And I'll just read from here so I get it right. You built it to assist people in gaining more access to a felt sense of emotional safety. I'm going to read that again, and then I want to kind of unpack that a little bit. So it's built to assist people in gaining more access to a felt sense of emotional safety. Or again, what makes me feel safe. Okay, so I would love it if you would explain why you think this matters, like this model in this form or whatever, and then also kind of a brief overview of what it means, what it looks, sounds, feels like, which is a big thing, but we'll do our best to make it succinct and, well, not succinct, succinct-ish.
Yeah, of course. Wow. Where should I begin? I feel like,
Well, why did you start it? Why did you bother? Why bother?
yeah. I feel like, so part of the reason why I started it was because I was noticing a gap in my practice with the families that I was working with. I was noticing, okay, a lot of people have tools and a lot of people have resources, but not a lot is happening, or not a lot of change is occurring, maybe at the pace that people want it to. And so when I did a little deeper dive into why that was, I figured out that safety is a really huge core common need within all of us. And the way that I define safety is so safety is a felt sense. Safety is a sense that we have within ourselves where when we kind of do that like radar effect on our life, the world, our environment, it's either kind of a thumbs up or thumbs down kind of situation. We either feel safe or unsafe. And when we kind of dig a little bit deeper, I actually found out that it's not actually binary. It's not just safe or unsafe. It's actually more dynamic and it's more fluid, which means that it changes from moment to moment. Our feeling of safety changes based on who we're with, based on our environment, based on our experiences, specifically like our early childhood experiences too, the parenting that we give, the parenting that we receive. There's just so many factors that I found out actually predict how safe we feel. And so while I was kind of creating this model, I put out just sort of a question to people who follow me on social media. And I sort of said, what makes you feel safe? And I got back all these, probably about 300 responses about things that make people feel safe. And so what I did is I kind of mapped it out just because this is how my brain works. I'm just super nerdy and super like into this kind of stuff. But So I mapped it out all on the floor, and I put everything into different buckets. And I found out that there were 8 kind of common themes and 8 kind of ways that people nourish their body, or ways that people access a level of safety that feels nourishing. And so the roots of safety are those 8 different categories. And so it's kind of built like a wheel. So all the spokes on the wheel are the different routes that people use, or different pathways that people travel in order to feel safe. And so there are ones that are resourcing just like within ourselves, ones that we can do like right here, right now. There are ones that involve other people. There are ones that involve like other environmental components. So things that maybe involve like the systems that we grew up in, or the systems that we live. So for example, um, if you're a person of color, for example, the way that you experience safety is a lot different than white people. So I brought in a systemic lens, and that was really important to me in the development of this model, because it really just acknowledges that actually the ways in which we feel safe is so individual, but it's also incredibly um, broad. And that's why I like this idea of calling it the trauma-informed love languages, because with the love languages model, it's very fluid, very dynamic. So it allows people to kind of move in and out of their love languages, and also acknowledges just how dynamic and ever-changing it is. And so while we may have our preferred love languages or our preferred routes of safety um, that we maybe rely on in times of change and struggle and transition, there are ones that are new and are changing and growing. And so in terms of the trauma-informed love languages piece, part of the gap that I see in the love languages model is that it really just talks about um, within myself. It's really just about like within the individual, and really kind of defines love as this like kind of really uh, linear kind of idea about love. And so I envision safety as encompassing love, but also involving care, community, connection. And so I look at sort of safety as that really dynamic element of what makes me feel safe in this world. And so what results is the 8 different routes.
Yeah, yeah, and I can see like even a lot of the talk online around self-care, like there's a lot of controversy and back and forth, because often we do think of it as like the love language as a thing that we can do for ourselves. But the truth is that if somebody has no work and no, access to education, and they live in a community with, few, safe resources or whatever, it's like, a bubble bath isn't really going to do a whole lot for them. And I
Yeah.
really do appreciate too that you've talked about, looking more broadly to include people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color, because that's obviously like it's in the forefront, but this is something that we've ignored for way too long, right? Like it can't be ignored. Okay, so I do have a few little questions. So is the goal, like I feel like the goal is probably also just awareness that, somebody might just have never heard of these other ideas, and they're like, oh, like a light bulb moment, like, oh, and they can start experimenting. But is it also to identify like a couple of the core ways that we already do this work, or is it to try to kind of investigate all of them to create a sort of a more integration, or like, I don't really know the words to use, but
Yeah, exactly. I think that part of what my goal was number one, just what you mentioned, which was to give language to people's experiences that they're already experiencing, or things that are already happening. And then, as a nice bonus, it also gives people other options or other routes for accessing maybe or trying something that they haven't tried before. And so I'll give you one example of that. So inner guidance is one of the roots of safety. And it's the one that I talk about in terms of that a lot of therapists apply like pretty readily. So if you look at a lot of therapy modalities, they're really about resourcing an individual with skills or tools within themselves that they can rely on in times that they need to feel more safe. So inner guidance really captures a lot of like the broad sweeping kind of uh, tools and structures that we already have in place with things like meditation, breath work, like challenging our thoughts in like kind of a cognitive behavioral therapy kind of framework. Um, and really it's capitalizing on the inner resources or the inner guidance that someone has within them. So religion falls into that. Spirituality also falls into that.
Okay.
Exercise might be a way that someone relies on their inner guidance.
Hey, let's see, where were we? I think we were still talking about sort of the why behind it. And I'm not sure if anything, is there anything else on the top of mind that you had wanted to say and got missed because of the tech stuff?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I definitely wanted to focus on was the fact that the ways in which we travel in and out of our roots is a process called safety seeking. And that is a really important and integral part of this model because it acknowledges the ways that, it acknowledges that the ways that we travel towards feeling safe is pretty dynamic and pretty ever changing. But I call that safety seeking, and a lot of people might reframe that, or traditionally it may be known as other words. So people may be calling it like attention seeking, maybe in a lot of young kids. It may be really it's to say that there's actually a lot of behaviors that we just engage in interpersonally that people may be looking at as negative. So things like outbursts, things like tantrums, meltdowns. These are all ways that we access safety. And so this is a way that I reframe it, is that it's connection seeking and safety seeking. So
Right.
it's reframing attention seeking to like attachment seeking or safety seeking or connection seeking. And
Yeah.
so that reframe is absolutely pivotal to our understanding of this model of safety. And because it acknowledges the ways that like um, no one is ever doing this like for like bad intention. Like, so it reframes a lot of bad behaviors, let's say, air quotes. So things like defiance, things like addictions, things like um, and just think of any, like, let's say traditionally negative behavior or negative emotion or negative experience that people have. We can generally reframe it in terms of a safety seeking function.
Yeah, I love that. And in our work together, like in the Brave and Beautiful space, um, I like to reinforce that idea, thinking about how we judge behaviors like, say, emotional eating, or like you already mentioned, addiction. And I like to, like, if we're focused, if we're rooted in self-compassion, we're reminded of that common humanity and the truth that we're all kind of just trying our best to figure out how to move through this world with the self-protective mechanisms in place that we've built up, with the tools we've acquired, with, and when we can look at it from that perspective, the judgment lowers. We can get curious. We can start to notice in our body, what does this feel like? Like if I'm drinking a third glass of wine, like what's up? What's going on in my body and my brain, and what am I? I am trying to feel safe, right? And I feel like it boils down to that. So, but I think that, yeah, always moving away from judgment into self-compassion so that we actually have room to listen to new ideas, to get curious, and maybe to experiment a bit. Like, without that gentleness, I think we stay in a defensive mode and it's hard to see beyond our normal patterns. So,
It's so true. And the thing that I also like wanted to add about the self-compassion piece was that the only way that compassion is possible is for us to acknowledge suffering. And self-compassion is actually born out of looking into ourselves and acknowledging the ways in which we've suffered or the ways in which we've been hurting. We have to accept that suffering is a part of life or a part of our experience or a part of our lived experience in order to develop self-compassion. So I often say that like self-compassion within ourselves has to be birthed out of the acknowledgement of our own suffering. And I find that people who struggle with the self-compassion practice often aren't looking at themselves as worthy of suffering or like having had suffered. Um, and same for other people, right? In order to extend compassion to other people, we have to look at like people's behaviors or people's thoughts or feelings or intentions and look at those and say, wow, like that person must be really having a hard time or a really hard go. Right? We have to be able to witness it and notice it in order for us to address it.
yeah, and then, but also going back, because I feel like, yes, and I know people who just, they believe that their suffering, their pain is a proof of their inadequacy. they're
Oh yeah.
they are bad, broken, less than, and it's like, no, like we literally will all suffer. We're not getting out of this world without some kind of struggle, pain. Like it's going to look different, but we all, you know, that's part of what it means to be fully human in a messy world, right?
Yes. Thank you for naming that. Of course.
All right, so let's talk about the body, that felt sense of safety. So if people who are listening here or tuning in later aren't very practiced at identifying felt sense of emotional safety, can you help us break that down a bit? Like what does that mean? And then how can people start developing this self-knowledge and experiment with these 8 roots of safety? But first, like that felt sense of safety in their body, because a lot of people really are not in tune with their bodies, first of all. And then, so we're not, you know, based on my comparative limited knowledge about trauma and how it manifests in our lives and our bodies, there's a lot of fear. There can be, for some people, a lot of fear about going inward and you know, but because this isn't a therapeutic setting, we won't go there. But let's say, just generally speaking, those of us listening, if we're not already in tune with our bodies, like what does that mean? What were the exact words? Because I love that phrase, a felt sense of emotional safety. So what does that mean, and how can we start to even practice that?
Yeah, good one. I developed a companion to this question because I get it so often, and you can find it on the resources section on my website. It's called the Felt Sense Journal, and the Felt Sense Journal is not a journal in the traditional sense where journaling often is a practice where we're like kind of writing down our thoughts. Felt sense journaling is a method that I developed in order to actually cultivate that awareness within ourselves. And so it's a step-by-step practice. And so the felt sense journal kind of guides you through, well, how do I know what I'm feeling, and how do I develop that felt sense? And so basically it came out of this idea that I realized that we have this really interesting feelings culture where we are so much more, and maybe I'm even speaking to a lot of younger people, but the way that we communicate often is through intellect and language and ideas and rationality, as opposed to in feelings, right? We're really kind of a feelings averse kind of culture. And so the way that I kind of capture that is through the example of we're so much more okay with sort of saying, haha, yeah, that's really funny, as opposed to actually laughing. Or we're so much more comfortable intellectualizing our feelings as opposed to actually feeling them, right? And so that contributes to this idea of disconnect and this idea of not being able to feel feelings because we're so much more comfortable thinking about them. And perhaps I would venture to say that we're more comfortable thinking about them because that feels safer than actually feeling them. And so the Felt Sense Journal allows us to really develop a new language and a new practice for tuning into our bodies to actually feel what that feels like. And so to your point, um, it's really difficult for people to cultivate an awareness of what roots of safety benefit them if they don't know what makes them feel safe, or even know what safety feels like or is supposed to feel like. And so the Felt Sense Journal that I developed um, helps people become on that journey of feeling again. And so it's breaking down into a number of different categories, but really the first step is to resource yourself, and it's to really kind of bring yourself into the present moment and to resource yourself with some tools and strategies for feeling inside of your body. So one practice that I suggest is even just like putting your hand like on your heart and just sort of tuning into what that feels like, or holding your shoulders and just like pushing your shoulder blades back, just feeling like when you manipulate your body posture, like what happens in your body. And if I were to kind of like take a tangent for a second, really the way that I understand feelings is that it's just energy. It's energy flowing through your body. And so feelings live in your body, whereas thoughts live in your brain. And so because feelings kind of play out in the body, tuning into different parts of the body is really helpful for cultivating that awareness.
Neat. I'm so interested in this topic, but like I've shared, Sandra's nodding her head, yes. Also, thank you for the reminder to hit record, Sandra. I appreciate it.
Ah.
Um,
And well, and the other thing that I want to add too is that, so this is what I call a somatic investigation. A somatic, ways that we can return to the body is through our somatic way of knowing, right? And so somatic means, so soma, the root word, means mind and body together, right? So using the mind and body, and we know that um, at the soma level, so like deep within like our like subcutaneous, like into our body, that's where trauma lives, and trauma lives like energetically in a somatic sense. And so that's why we use somatics in order to access that, in order to like release a lot of that energy, or to process a lot of that tension that is just flowing through our body. And so that's different for everybody. Some people hold it as tension in their chest. Some people it's like a really strong heart rhythm. Some people it's like sweating. Some people specifically like sweaty extremities. So like hands and feet, forehead, that kind of thing. So again, somatically, it shows up differently for everybody.
yeah. So I wasn't going to share this, but like it's so similar that I just want to share it. You already told you in advance about my panic attack since my son died, and these women know. But the way that I feel it and express it, and it sounded weird to me at first, but I'm like, it just feels like there's this like tremendous, like huge amount of energy trying to get out of my body. And it's just like, and in the beginning, there was no window between the rise of this energy right into panic, and now that window is enlarging, so I can feel it and I can shake it out and I can move, it still stayed the same, where it's like it's this energy. And I actually haven't ever heard anybody just say it's like the emotion lives as energy, and I'm like, that's what I feel. And it's like I have to get it out. So and sometimes I look, I actually feel hyperactive, like and
Mm-hmm.
but not unhappy, but hyperactive. I need to like just get it out. And so I've had to express that to my family, so they're not like thinking I'm in trouble, that I'm okay. But yeah, that's what I've lived. This is my lived experience for these past months. And it just feels good, I guess, to hear somebody else kind of express it in that way. And because I'm like, yes, okay, you get it. You may not
Yeah.
get it, or you may have or may not, but also when we think about it that way, and one of the things I would love is like more and more people hear it expressed that way, so that they're less fearful, and then we know, then I'm safe here, even in the middle of this panic attack or scary experience, or whatever it is, right? Like it doesn't have to be trauma related. It can be just normal going through life. But if we lower the fear factor around it, then I can be present here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And in addition to the fear factor, I think you're also referring to like the threat, right? The presence of the threat or the danger. And it's
yes, yeah,
not just the actual real threat. It's also sometimes the perception of threat or danger, right? Which is sometimes why we never actually understand why we're panicking, or why that's the onset is occurring, right? And so another word for that energy is traumatic retention. So like that, like really like built in like energetic response. um, and trauma release exercises are really great for that. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of those, but
unless it came by another name, probably not. So
yeah,
is that
TRE.
something that, okay, I can check it out. Is that something that you want to say more about, or is that something
Uh,
that's just going to check it out later?
uh, so trauma release exercises, TRE, are really great tools, and you can actually find some videos on YouTube that kind of guide you through it. My suggestion would be for you to do it with somebody who you feel safe with. So have
Mhm.
somebody else in the room with you, and either using that person as kind of a guide. If there's someone else in the video, then you can use it as a second person. But even just sort of using it as someone you can like kind of ground yourself with. So sometimes just their presence can be really helpful. But basically, the idea is that uh, trauma release exercises are exercises that release traumatic energy that is stored in the psoas muscle. So that's PSOAS in the psoas. And so basically it's a muscle group that kind of runs down your spine and into your hips. And yeah, a lot of trauma is stored in there when we can't fight, flight, or freeze. So.
Thank you. I'm going to check that out. So, all right, let's see. So in a recent social media post, you wrote, healing happens when your deeply internal self-exploration work is routinely met and supported by the corrective experience of a deeply attuned relationship. So again, deeply attuned relationship, what would qualify as a deeply attuned relationship?
A safe relationship.
Just safe, so, okay.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't mean also, so I guess safety would include like feelings heard. Like, so like if you're in a therapy relationship, say, and the therapist is kind of distracted and stuff like that, then that would not be a deeply attuned relationship, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. And what I should also note is that a relationship just really has to be you and something else, right? So it can be like you and nature, you and a hobby, you and like your favorite art form. So it doesn't have to be with another person. However, and so really my premise is that healing happens in relationships.
Yeah.
And we don't just have to do it by ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. And so what would be some clues? Like, you know, we're talking about practicing this sort of felt sense of safety. And as we're doing that, what might be some clues that maybe are common that could be indicators that, you know, even if we haven't yet intellectually realized, okay, yeah, I don't feel safe, but some clues that something isn't right here. And I'm, you know, I'm wanting to run, hide, whatever.
Oh, what a great question. So the answer to that is going to be everything. The answers are in our body. So the number one tool that I would suggest is the breath. So focusing on your breathing and focusing on your pattern of breathing, and that's going to be your biggest clue. Oftentimes, when the stress response is activated, or when we're in kind of a triggering situation, our breath is often going offline and it's often shutting down. And so noting kind of where your breath is sitting and noting that pattern of breathing is going to be really helpful. And so if I could add more language to that, maybe it would be helpful for you for that resourcing exercise, which is to resource yourself with the breath. The only way that the breath is going to be resourcing for you is if your breath is a neutral anchor. So a neutral anchor essentially just means that your breath isn't the source of trauma or like your panic or whatever it is you're experiencing. So um, if that's the case, if you find it hard to take a deep breath in, for example, then you may just like find another body part that may be a neutral anchor for you. So it could even just be like holding your arm or kind of like cuddling yourself this way. But really what we're talking about is resourcing yourself with a level of groundedness and a level of safety that will allow you to tune into this like level of like calm or relaxation or soothing. And so in terms of the breath piece, I do think it's valuable to add that there are three different types of breathers. We have belly breathers, so that's like right down into our abdomen. We also have chest breathers. And then we also have clavicle breathers, so people who breathe like up in their throat. And so if you were just to do like a little somatic investigation on yourself, if you take a breath in your nose, I want you to sort of track like how far does it travel down into your body. For some people, it stops right here at the clavicle. Some people, it's in the chest, and then some people, it's in the tummy at the very bottom of where the abdomen is, or even your diaphragm. So diaphragmatic. And so that's helpful because the ways in which you kind of reinitiate that breath or that breath pattern, you're going to want to really force that breath all the way down into the belly. And oftentimes when we are in that state of unsafety, we go into the stress response or the trauma response, which is to uh, really initiate like the upper breath. So in the upper lungs. So that is where you're breathing in your clavicle or only in your lungs or in your chest. So we want to really initiate breathing from the abdomen.
Yeah.
The second part of that is nose breathing versus mouth breathing. And so Some people are mouth breathers, and so they breathe in their nose, out their mouth naturally. However, the correct way to breathe, like physiologically speaking, is in your nose and out your nose. And so recentering the breath is always going to be really important. So if you're feeling kind of unsafe or you're feeling panicky, then locating your breath, like kind of where is it sitting? Is it like shut down? Is it stopped? Or is it like really fast paced? So tracking your breath is always going to be like a really important resource to tune into.
Yeah. So I know we could spin off wildly in multiple directions here, but I'm thinking about the difference between sometimes we are safe, we really are safe, and then we can, kind of reflect and notice what's up and maybe try to regulate our breathing and things like that. And then there are other times in relationship, and in this case, I actually mean like with another person. It could be an employer, it could be a friend, whatever, a partner, and well, in which case we are physically safe. Let's say we are still physically safe. We're not in immediate danger of, being hurt, but we don't feel safe in, like, we're not being heard. They're speaking over us. They're advice giving instead of listening. They're, all these different things that come up. And I guess I'm curious about if there are also some clues in that, like, would that also be an example where one of the first maybe symptoms might be that you notice breath pattern changing, or are there other things that we can be on the lookout for? I mean, I don't know. It's kind of a big, vague question. So, but if anything pops up for you.
Yeah, it's a great question actually. And so yeah, the breath is a good thing to tune into. And really what you want to do is bring your breath back in as a neutral anchor. So again, to even just to reinitiate your breathing can be like really empowering and really grounding for you in a moment that feels like maybe what someone said like triggered you, or maybe there was like kind of a moment that like kind of destabilized your breath, or kind of was really hard on your body. And so yeah, re-engaging the breath is really helpful. Another one is to track your thoughts. So track like the narrative that is being spun about the current situation. So for some people, and this is for the Brene Brown fans out there, this is a really great tool I learned from her. So she sort of says, like, when you are sort of in that moment, you can just sort of track that narrative and tell yourself, the story I'm telling myself is blank.
Yeah.
So it's another really good tool for just getting a hold of that narrative and really sort of showing yourself that it's a story that you're creating, right? It's not actually the reality or the lived experience per se.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. One thing that I know I've done a lot naturally over the past couple plus decades in learning to stay kind of grounded and anchored is visualizing a space between me and that other person.
Oh, good one.
Yeah, and I've talked about that a lot. And I, for those of us who can really pick up people's energy or when it's your inner circle and somebody's hurting or somebody's angry or whatever, it's hard to not carry that. And then I'm not as self-aware and I'm reactive more than, responding in a way that I want to. And so, yeah, for me, it's helpful to just envision this physical distance. Like
I love that. And if I could put more language to that experience too, what you're doing is a process called mentalizing. And so mentalizing is a process where I can acknowledge those are your thoughts and these are my thoughts. Those are your feelings and these are my feelings, right?
Yeah.
So being able to actually tune into someone else's experience can actually be really important and empowering for us if we have that distance that you speak about. So it's a great tool. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So many great ideas. And I know we could talk for 8 more hours, but I am going to move on. Well, part of that same question, let's see. Okay. What to do if we don't have that in our life? I think I'm just going to move on. So you've mentioned how humans are co-regulators, and I don't remember if that was the exact term you used, but there are a lot of things that disrupt our ability to find safe, healthy relationships. And for this question, I want to specifically think about the pandemic and how it is like a big global trauma of sorts. It's created all sorts of chaos and havoc in the world. You know, some people are doing okay and some people are suffering. And then at the same time, a lot of social unrest is, you know, kind of bubbling up. And so there's lots going on in the world. And people are lonely. And so they're lonely, they've been lonely to start out with. Many people don't have great relationships, which is actually why I'm such a fan of social media and working online. I actually think it's a fabulous tool used wisely for building relationship and community. But the pandemic has disrupted people's ability to get hugs and to, you know, be with their people and all these things. So I am curious about if you have some habits or practices you'd recommend to people listening to help them during this specific season of life to stay grounded, engaged in the world in healthy ways, and also connected. And then I added in my talking points, I said, without feeling more triggered. And that's because our first thought might be go online. Yet online is such a noisy, angry place right now. And I am of the belief, because I do feel resourced enough, that I won't turn away from suffering. I will quiet the noise, but my family's Black. I have 2 bisexual children. I have, like, there's a lot of things I care deeply about. I just lost a child. I'm not going to turn away from the suffering. I want to be an advocate. I want to use my voice to help. But it can be very triggering. It can be very hard. And again, those are my personal things, but you know, everybody listening will have their own reasons why it's hard online right now. So again, big question, but really important. We need to stay connected and healthy relationships. So what are your thoughts about how we can do this and stay connected and engaged and avoid being more triggered? And then maybe we can spin off a little bit and talk about, for those of us who have children, you know, let's say even like teens and young adults who are online a lot, maybe you have some ideas for how we can support them as well.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of mantras. I think that having like little nuggets of wisdom or kind of things that we can return to in moments of stress or feeling triggered or feeling panicked is really helpful and really stabilizing. And so, you know, I have so many mantras, but I think one of the ones that I think will always be really helpful is just giving yourself permission and defaulting to whatever it is that I need right now is okay, is really helpful. And one that I'll also add is that you know yourself best, right? So you know what you need, and you know how to take care of yourself. And I also extend that same belief back to myself. I know what I need. I know how to take care of myself. And if there are things preventing that, then that's the problem, not me. So I often like to do a lot of displacement and do a lot of, well, the problem is the problem. I'm not the problem. And so kind of resourcing myself like through that like inner guidance kind of perspective to get myself to that level of safety or resourced compassion that like makes me feel really soothed.
Okay,
And
can you
so
give an example?
yeah. So an example might be like if I'm feeling like quite lonely, right? There's a reason for that, right? But I refuse to carry that burden on myself for feeling lonely, right? It's not my fault. I'm not the reason why I feel lonely. It's not because people don't like me. It's not because I can't make friends or I can't like socialize or I can't connect. There are other factors at play. And I say that because I just don't want to live in a world where I have to blame myself for all of these problems that occur. I, I, I fully believe in this idea that we are all interconnected and there's a reason why all this is happening. And I just refuse to carry all of that myself. Is that
So,
confident
so it's
enough?
somehow like a separation of sorts, like I care
Yeah.
deeply and also it's not all on me. Is that
Yeah.
what you're saying?
It is, and it's hard though because our felt experience is often different, right? So the way that we feel like that burden or we feel that heaviness often sits a lot differently for a lot of us. And that changes based on our lived experience or changes based on our identity in the world, right? And so the level of safety that we have access to is political. Like, it is based on kind of like what's going on in the world, right? And just acknowledging that, for me at least, feels grounding, because I get to take it outside of my own self and take it out. It releases the pressure a little bit. So it's kind of a way that I just like release the pressure valve inside of my own head to be like, Jake, you are the problem, and you know it's on you to solve this.
Okay.
But I know how unsettling that might feel for somebody who is experiencing loneliness to like a really like stressful or like crippling degree, right? Where it does feel like inescapable. So I hold space for both of those to be true at the same time. So the last one that I would sort of suggest is that multiple things can be true at the same time, that
Yeah.
multiple realities are true, right? And often it's competing things that are true. So I'll say like it's a both and situation.
One of my favorite things in the world, both and.
Yeah, yeah.
Very helpful. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So then for relationships, I guess I would like to always encourage people. It can be hard to find your people, and
Yeah.
try anyway. You know, keep trying anyway. Um, Social media can be noisy, and it is possible to use it in a wise way with good boundaries, and just keep pursuing and staying open to um, moments of connection. And I feel like that could even be, you know, like I love to watch the little people who live and play next door. You know, it's not the same as my own children, but it's still delightful. You know, if I allow myself to feel that, to sit in that joyful kind of emotion in the moment, or yeah, little moments of connection, I think we can stay open to those as well. And I think that really speaks to that kind of moving away from that binary or all or nothing, right? It's like, maybe what I want is to go back to normal, and I can still stay open to all these little ways of connecting and loving people and feeling loved and all of that. So
Yeah, totally. And it requires that we return to ourselves as like the ultimate guide, right? And so just asking the core question, what do I need right now, is really helpful for directing that journey, right? And sending us on that pathway of exploration is, what do I need right now, and what's going to make me feel nourished?
yeah. So, and I was even thinking, like you mentioned a mantra. I'm a huge fan of mantra. Each year I choose one for my birthday, a new one. And that really helps me through the year. But in our work together, we've talked lots about kind of pausing, especially when we notice stress or frustration or resentment or whatever, or maybe our behavior is not aligned with our core values and who and how we want to be. And then just saying, yeah, what do I want or need right now? So we've talked about that lots, but I also really like the idea of what would help me feel safe right now, and kind of feeling that. And I think that I like that too.
Yeah,
So
I'm a fan.
I
Love
know
it.
you are. So, okay. So Jake, I'm going to ask you for one final thought, and I just want to check in with you. We're a little late because of the audio issues. Do you have a few minutes to answer some questions?
Yeah, sure.
You do? Okay. Then let's finish up with this, and then we'll open it up to some questions. So what's a final thought, a bit of wisdom, a word of encouragement that you would like to offer people listening if they're struggling and want to, well, I'm just going to read my exact words, struggling or feeling threatened, and want to carve a path forward in this season?
Yeah. I think probably the greatest piece of advice is that connection is what heals us, and connection is what needs to guide us through this moment. And any way we can stay connected is going to be really helpful. And so I don't want to like scoot over the fact that you are all a group right now and you're coming together and you're building community, right? And this is a way that you're staying connected to yourselves, to each other, to the work that you're doing. Connection is what heals us. It really is. And I I've experienced that, and I know that to be true. And I I understand why people may be skeptical of that as well. Like I also can see that that may feel a bit threatening or feel a bit dangerous to open up, because connection requires vulnerability. So the next piece that I would offer is that vulnerability is okay, and vulnerability is actually essential. So in order to get through this, to experience the healing that we want, we really have to move through it. We can't move around it.
Right.
And the way that we move through it is through vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And again, because I'm such a huge fan of like baby steps and like the smallest step forward, I'll mention this to anybody listening, like even in our group. And so then this may be, and I'm referring to the Brave and Beautiful community specifically, but there may very well be other groups like grief circles and lots of different places where this would also be true. It's okay to dip your toes in and then, and be present, like, and engage in a way that feels safe to you. So some people come and they're not safe being vulnerable, like openly in the group, but they email me because they're not there. And that's fine. Like, and I also am part of other groups where, like, for me, that sense of safety is first in any conversation. I mean, I can't control every conversation, but if I'm choosing it, like, let's say an interview, a therapist, it's like, first, safety. And this was always true, and it's even more true as I'm getting help for PTSD and loss and, you know, trauma. But that sense of safety, it's first and foremost. So, but it's okay to tell the truth about what you feel, what you want and need. Leave relationships where you do not feel safe. Test things out, right? So sometimes it takes multiple tries to find a therapist. You're like, you know, yes. And it's frustrating sometimes when we're hurting, but I do think it's necessary. You don't give up, you know, just test the waters, and it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You're allowed to engage in the ways that you're ready for. So I'd like to, just help people know that we're all, you know, and that's what I think is, I think a lot of times people really do look at others and think, oh, they've got it all together, you know, and we should know by now this isn't true, but this is still part of, you know, this happens. And so we make assumptions about everybody else and, oh, they're comfortable in this. It's like, no, we're all practicing. We're all practicing vulnerability. We're all practicing loving ourselves, practicing self-compassion. It's not a one-time like deal, right? Like where we arrive and now we're all done. So.
Totally agree. Love all of what you said.
All right, so any questions? And if you have a question, let's just go ahead, unmute yourself and jump in. If you have a question for Jake. And I didn't get Katrina's recorded, unfortunately, because it sounded juicy. Any other questions? No pressure, but just watching.
If it feels safer to type it out too, you can also do that.
Okay, you can use the chat. Okay. I don't think, Adele?
Nope.
Yeah.
Adele, I see you talking, but I can't hear you. So I think you're muted.
I'm muted. Can you hear me?
I did not hear you. Oh, and it's really warbly. Okay. Do you want to try using the chat box and typing it out? If you're on a laptop, the chat is at the bottom of the screen. And if you're on a different device, I'm not sure, but maybe somebody else could help you if they're on a... No? Okay. Okay. All right, so we'll just leave it, I guess, Jake.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I'll type my email in the chat box as well, if people want to send me an email.
Okay, good. Yeah, and then, yeah, exactly. So it's jake@straightuphealth.ca, and I'll add that in our group as well. So you guys don't have to worry about jotting it down right now. All right, so thanks so much, Jake, for being my guest today. I really, really loved connecting face-to-face. Really appreciate your work online. I feel like I'm learning a lot and being encouraged a lot by what you share, so I'm grateful.
Deep gratitude to you all. I love that you're all coming together, and it's actually quite inspiring. And I love that you've just created this community. And I think it's just so important and so brilliant and so fulfilling. So deep, deep gratitude for all of you. Thank you for showing up for this work and doing this brave and courageous stuff. So.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just going to check the chat box in case I missed somebody's question though. No, that was just you. Okay. All right. Okay, signing off, guys. See you guys soon.